Yeah, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Joel Keene, and we're going to speak a little bit about today's modern collaboration and specifically challenges for enterprises when they are dealing with Microsoft Teams integration. So a little bit about me. I am the product manager for Continuent Connect here at Continuent. I've been a Microsoft UC Solutions architect for going on 15 years now. I spent the time in Microsoft OCS 2007 R2 all the way through Link and Skype for Business and where we are with Teams today. Largely focused on Teams calling integrations as well as what we do with Teams meetings. And then prior to that, I spent a lot of time with Avaya, very heavily focused on SIP-based applications and what they were doing in that space. A little bit about Continuent, right? We've been a managed services provider for in the telephony space for 27 something years, right? Very heavily focused as a Microsoft UC partner. Recently being awarded Microsoft's Global Partner of the Year for calling, which is something that we achieved in 2020 as well. And you'll see that we work across the entire enterprise environment, right? We very specifically succeed in the large enterprise global space and spend a lot of time with healthcare and manufacturing, as well as higher ed and retail, and really kind of any organization that faces the challenges that we're going to speak to today. Kind of an overview of today's approach. So we're going to talk about today's current communications trends, and then really the roadmap going forward, right? What enterprises need to think about today, what the future might look like, and how we can put all of this together. So stepping right into it. So today's current communications trends, right? I think the biggest thing on everybody's mind is going to be the sunset of the PSTN and what that really looks like over the coming decade. We've seen a transition from telephony being delivered over landlines for the last century or so, right? And then today everybody's working off network. And we've seen that transition not only from the enterprise environment itself, right, where we have leveraged internal networks in order to deliver communications technologies across our platform, but we've seen those carrier transitions as well, right? We've seen all of the large providers step into that network space and step away from traditional telephony delivery. All right, that actually means a couple of things. One is those providers are actually delivering more than just the telephony service over those lines, right? And that's something that we can take advantage of. It also offers a lot more redundancy as we look into some of the future technology. So there are some things that enterprises can really start to take advantage of, but one of the things that they want to think about getting away from is that reliance on existing PSTN. Right, so if we think about those traditional landlines and those single points of failure, we're also thinking about carriers that are really no longer investing in that kind of infrastructure, right? They want to be able to provide those heavier services as well. But that's not just happening from the carrier side, right? That's also happening really from the application and the vendor side, right? So we see a lot of not just Microsoft, but a lot of its competitors as well trying to move away from the box that has typically been sitting on-prem for the last century or so. I mean, hopefully only the last couple of decades. But as we move forward, right, we're really getting away from that into more as a service deliveries, right? So everybody's thinking about unified communication as a service, contact center as a service, so your UCaaS, CCaaS kind of provisions. And there's a lot of reason for that. And a lot of it has to do with, one, just primarily cost, right? But we're also talking about an expansion of those services beyond what we've been able to achieve in the past. The other thing that we want to think about is really just the development of the internet, right? So we see an increased quality and reliability of that because that is where carriers are actually spending that money, right? So things that we used to spend a lot of time on in the past, as far as voice being that number one delivery service, is actually starting to get minimized as we move forward, right? Because not only can we deliver voice today, we can deliver video right alongside it. We can deliver our other services as well. So if you think in terms of retail, right, voice is always business critical. It's always been top of that list, but keeping all of our services up is really important, right? So we don't want to see our POS go down just because we've lost some sort of network. If we can keep voice up, we have the ability to keep our other services up as well. So there are a lot of things that we want to start to think about in terms of the way our enterprises are moving forward. Okay. Today, that still means you want to think about some things as to what you are doing from a organizational roadmap, right? So leveraging and realizing returns on existing investments, right? So being able to take things forward that are really working for you today and not really interrupting your current working environment, right? So minimizing disruption is critical, but still trying to look at taking advantage of the technologies that are out there and positioning your organization to move forward with more innovative technologies as they come down the pipe, right? That takes time, right? So one of the biggest things when you go out there and you start looking at, hey, how are we going to make a change? There are a lot of business cases in your environment today that you might not be thinking about as being connected to your telephony systems that really are solidly integrated. Right, so some of those things that come to mind, traditionally we think about like, analog phones. We have fax machines that are sitting out there. We have, door lines. We have video call boxes. All sorts of things that are out there in the environment that we think of as kind of these standalone things, and a lot of those run through existing PBX applications today. Right, so spending time to figure out the best way to move that forward does take time. Right, so even swapping out analog phones, there are a lot of solutions that we look at today. Whether we put an ATA in place, do we go high end and start to look at, hey, you know what, we're going with Microsoft Teams, so we're going to put Teams phones at every location. And there's a real balance to that because it doesn't always make sense, right? So for instance, I referenced the manufacturing space, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense for us to go out and put $200 phone investments on poles that are going to get smashed up by forklifts, right? As those drive by, we're really looking at making sure that we can maintain business as we do today, keeping those costs low, and still being able to pull things forward and leverage those technologies as we see them, like in the cloud. And then the other thing we want to keep in mind is that those end user interfaces are changing. So even just referencing the way that phones work today, we've seen a huge expanse of that. Obviously, mobile phones have had a huge impact in the way that we communicate. So no longer are we just tethered to, hey, I'm going to pick up and I'm going to call, make a voice call, right? We see everybody moving over to texting or making sure that we can deliver video as well. We also see those things sliding, not sliding across the environment, where I can move from one location to another, not just on a single, mobile device, but across devices, right? So if you think in terms of Microsoft Teams, right, we can join a meeting today, or I can join a call. I can move that call to a different device, whether that's my cell phone, or if I have a phone on my desk because I've made it to the office and that's my preferred device, I can go in that direction. It also means that we have a blend of what we see from consumer utilization as well as what we want to put into our business lives, right? So there's a lot of conversation around BYOD. That's not new. That's been going on for years, but it is something that becomes a lot more culturally significant, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but that transition and that change in that work appeal has been very prevalent, right, over the last several years, right? Coming out of the pandemic, how do people talk to people? All of that has been heavily accelerated, and making sure that we extend the capabilities of our existing infrastructure out to workers that are remote, or to other places in the environment where we know that they're just simply not stable, or not sitting in just one office, where they're not static in one place, right? So all that extensibility really results in having to come up with a way for your enterprise, right, to identify solutions for all of those things that you're doing today. And then the next thing what we want to think about is like what's coming down the road, right? Are we going to spend time and money on only finding immediate solutions, or can we really think about putting things in place that are, for all intents and purposes, future proof, right? Things that can adapt with future innovations, things that we aren't even thinking about today, right? one of the things that I think we have a focus on really is technology and what that means for our environment. Again, bringing in UCaaS, right? Bringing in CCaaS, leveraging the cloud, leveraging network that we've already talked about, but also trying to understand what the next generation of workers really looks like and how they communicate today, right? It's substantially different than the way that we've been doing it traditionally, where we've kind of been tethered to a phone, right? Or we have an endpoint device that's sitting on the desk. So we've seen that transition where there's an expectation of more mobility, right? So referencing those endpoint devices, again, the BYOD, or having the extensibility across multiple devices, but also a transition in the way that people actually communicate with each other from a generational aspect, right? Voice used to rule everything, and that is simply changing, right? So we see a lot more adoption of some of that asynchronous communication. So thinking in terms of peer-to-peer chats, thinking in terms of texting or SMS or MMS, really giving us time to respond to messages in a way that we see fit. But we also need to integrate that into what our solutions look like moving forward. And as we get into actual communications, we see that adoption of not just voice, but we actually see a lot more video, right? Even today, I've got children, I've got some teenagers, and those teenagers FaceTime. Right? They do not make phone calls; they do voice and video, and that's been growing in development over the last number of years, right? So you actually see that technology being consumed a lot more readily than it has been in the past, when the alternative to that is typically text, right? And so actually moving away from that voice only centric society is going to be a huge change in the way that you actually have to adopt a strategy, right? Even to that, the thing that I go back to that I think is actually pretty funny, was driving down the road with my kids just a little while back. I'm out of Texas and we were on a road trip, and I had the kids reading the billboards, right? When I hear the question from the back, and all earnest questioning was, why are there phone numbers on billboards? And not really having a great answer to that past like, well, that's just the way that we did it. But we see all of the different things that are on those billboards today, right? We see websites, social media tags, and all of that stuff going on as actually being that primary point. And we're dealing with new generations of workers who really expect that kind of interaction as opposed to picking up a phone, dialing a number, right? So as we move into those UCaaS, CCaaS spaces, are there things that we can leverage or technologies that we can look at that really try and work to bring all of those things together, right? The other thing that we're going to think about are those AI-driven interactions, right? How can we maximize or optimize our workforce by leveraging those technologies? Now, they're still, new. And it's going to take some time for all of those things to mature, but they are moving very quickly, and I think we're all aware of that. But really understanding what that means to your environment and the way that you operate today is critical to making sure that you're actually leveraging that technology to the best of your enterprise's abilities. Okay. And then across that, we're actually going to start to see more of that convergence of your UC and CC platforms. So thinking in terms of, hey, we're doing more video today, we're doing more texting, we're going to see more alignment of those, the way that we've referred to it in the past, right, as federation services or interop services. So think in terms of you have somebody in a Teams meeting being able to join a WebEx meeting and have that work virtually seamlessly, not just for the voice component, where it's starting today, but also from, again, those chat components, from the video components, screen share, right? Those aren't completely new technologies, but the way that they're being handled today and the way that they're being approached by the different organizations that are putting these out there is really going to facilitate the way that that's built down the road. And we see some of that with Microsoft working with Zoom, working with Cisco to really make that a lot more of a seamless experience for most of our end users. Right. So all of that really culminates, though, in the reduction of our reliance on that PSTN. So when we're thinking about telephony, when we're thinking about what that means in a UC space, it's just going to be a kind of a constant reduction in the reliance upon that. Okay. Let's talk about what this really means, right? And where you can take advantage of some of these thoughts from an enterprise perspective. The first thing would be trying to unify those the needs of your PSTN globally, right? So again, we're going to see that reduction of the reliance on the PSTN, but PSTN is never going away. It's just going to change form, right? Carriers are still going to deliver it. We're still going to have vendors that are delivering voice-only solutions, and those are going to be critical to a lot of our business applications and business I'm sorry, our day-to-day business, right? But there are some things that we can take advantage of, right? So again, trying to unify that management experience can be critical for an organization, especially as we see the extensibility of those needs change. Right. So if you're thinking about different business units bringing in different applications, trying to work solely out of a single pane of glass, right? Reduce that what we call was that our click latency, right? Where we have our app switching latency, where I'm having to jump around to go from one thing to another thing. That happens both on the end user side as well as the administrative side, and all of that results in extended costs, and we can get away from that. All right, so one thing Continuum Connect does is we have a globally distributed platform. We sit in multiple Azure Interconnect data centers. Right, we are highly available and redundant across all of those data centers, and we bring the PSTN into those as well. So really, the goal there is to be able to allow enterprises to access their UCaaS services, or tie into Teams calling, deliver PSTN with the same reliability that we've had in the past without having to bring all of that infrastructure in-house. The reality is that infrastructure is going to be cost prohibitive more and more as time goes along. Again, not just from the carrier side, but from the vendor side as well, right? There will always be organizations that are going to want to have that PBX or that box on-prem. But there's a reality where that's going to be cost prohibitive, and those vendors are going to want to make that cost prohibitive because it's not to their benefit to have to manage a bunch of disparate infrastructure, right? It's to their benefit to be able to build quality products that they can distribute the services out for the organizations that they serve. All right. So Continuum Connect really strives to achieve that singular interface. What we're really serving is the glue between those disparate platforms and the PSTN as we see them today. The next thing is to really think about stop spending money on telephony solutions to network problems, right? Traditionally, again, voice was priority. It is the business critical component. And over the last several decades, what we have done is make sure that we had redundant telephony in place in order to achieve the level of service that we expect and the level of uptime that we expect. And the reason for that was probably pretty obvious, but the network just wasn't there. The internet was not what it is today, right? But as carriers have actually invested in that infrastructure, built out that infrastructure, found value in delivering more services than just voice, what we find is a lot more extensibility and availability of high quality, low latency networks, right? So what that means from an organizational perspective is it's a paradigm shift in how we're going to think about delivering that technology to our end users, right? So that availability is now going to start to come through that network availability piece, right? So again, high availability of networks, redundancy in those networks, starting to think about leveraging more cellular technologies, more end user based technologies, whether that's just having smartphones that they can leverage in the case of localized outages, or even focus some of that reliance on leveraging those cellular technologies as your primary point. Right. The other thing that means is that as we pull that together and we centralize those services back to a singular platform, that we can actually reduce the amount of cost that we put behind that infrastructure. So if you think in terms of the way that we would traditionally deliver services to a decentralized organization, right? You have sites. Let's say we have sites all over North America, right? And for those offices, maybe we're bringing in POTS lines, maybe we're bringing in separate, different PRIs to those locations. Maybe we're even bringing in SIP trunks, right, in some of those locations today. The problem is you are paying for capacities that typically you don't need, right? Do I always need 23 channels of PRI if I have smaller offices? Do I always need multiple channels, right? If I can actually pull that together across the organization and centralize that by tying that to a central PSTN delivery and leveraging those services, what you're actually going to see is a reduction in cost on the actual delivery of that service. So the trade-off is I don't have as much infrastructure that I have to deal with. I get to reduce costs by reducing the capacity for the necessity of those services, but then I get the availability that's built into the cloud. So again, that high availability, that redundancy of those services as they're being delivered. And Continuing Connect really strives to deliver that, right? So again, the redundancy that we focus on, bringing the PSTN, bringing the service into multiple POPs, sitting as close to Microsoft Teams as possible, and giving your enterprise the access to tie into that service without having to invest in the infrastructure yourselves, and to instead focus your budget and your investments on network services and the redundancies there, right? So again, taking away from only focusing those investments on delivering voice, but delivering all of the other business critical services as well. Okay. The other thing you're going to want to think about is how can we optimize our workforce? That's where everybody's moving today. A lot of times we think about it in terms of automation, but there's really other things that we could do here. For us, right, we've taken Continuing Connect and built it out to be as seamless as possible across the organization, across the infrastructure, and make it accessible to all of our customers. But the other thing that we've done with that platform is allow for customization within the customer base, right? So outside of just Teams itself that we know can be customized for organizations based off of the features that we enable or limit within Teams via policies and whatnot. When we get beyond that, we start to step into PSTN or we start to step into integrations with other delivery. How can we do that and benefit your organization that allows you to keep those differentiators in place that benefit your organization, right? So we have a lot of flexibility in the platform, even though we've unified the solution so that we can optimize what we're delivering to all of our customer base, right? The thing that we focus on when we're putting that together, when it really comes down to it, is choice. So if we have heavy Microsoft Teams usage, there's still a reality where we have PBXs that are sitting in place that we still want to realize the return on. So we were speaking to that earlier. Well, one of the things we can do is bring that PBX as it exists today into the platform. It's going to give you that extensibility, right? It actually allows you to position yourself for a roadmap towards the future. So thinking about stepping towards moving from that legacy PBX into a UCaaS system, right? But doing it on your own terms while still leveraging the things that are getting you that return today, right? So the days of rip and replace are over, even in a cloud-based environment, right? So we can focus on, again, leveraging those investments in network technology so that we have that redundancy, keeping the things that are in place today so that we can minimize disruption to our workforce, but carrying those forward in a way that's going to allow for a seamless transition, or at the very least, a predictable and organized transition as we move from one solution to the next. And then workforce safety, right? Really, we're thinking in terms of emergency services. Okay. In the US, of course, we've seen regulations put in place over the last couple of years as to what really needs to happen with regards to 911. And Continuing Connect is fully compliant with that, right? So we're aware that Teams offers emergency services and it allows for things like dynamic E911 or nomadic E911, right? Depending on how we have all of that configured. But we also need to be able to deliver that to a provider. And then there's the reality that I spoke to a minute ago, where we still have legacy technologies that we know we have to bring forward. And we still have things that we know that we're going to spend some time looking for solutions to. And what Continuum Connect will allow us to do is bring those solutions forward into our platform, and then add the compliance for emergency calling to those existing devices, so that we can actually ensure that what we're doing as far as emergency calls are being delivered is compliant today at today's standards, given that legacy technology, right? So think about bringing your legacy PBX in, which is not running enhanced 911 today, certainly not if it's hanging off PRIs or POTS lines, but being able to bring that forward, get your emergency notifications, get things out to using today's E911 technologies, getting direction to the correct PSAPs, right? And so we're really decreasing that human latency, or those critical aspects of making sure that emergency services are delivered as accurately as possible and as quickly as possible to the right location. And then security, right? A couple of things on security, and sometimes we don't think about that from a telephony perspective because it's largely been a standalone component. But as you bring that into your environment, especially with Microsoft Teams, right, there is a lot of focus on what that means from identity and access. And one of the goals of Continuum Connect is really to focus on taking the onus of those liabilities off of your organization and bringing those into our platform. Right. So today you can focus on bringing your users into Microsoft Teams and leveraging the security stack that's built into Microsoft today, and really focusing on your end user community and how that is managed from an IAM perspective, and allowing Continuum to manage the back end. Right. The platform meets multiple ISO certifications and allows us to securely deliver services while reducing the necessity for your environment to actually poke holes in the edge network to allow for facilities of various services. Right, so all of that happens on the back end, really offsetting the liabilities of your organization and allowing you to focus on really just delivering those Microsoft Teams services that you do today. Right. And then finally, how do you move forward, right? So Continuum Connect is in a state of continuous improvement, right? We are always plugging new UC, CC platforms into the service itself. So again, not just from the PSTN side, but also tying into the various services with APIs that allow for unified management of those services. So today we can manage both the PSTN and Microsoft Teams from the Continuum Connect platform. Right, we could do that at one place, which is really great for a lot of organizations, especially if you're thinking in terms of the way that a lot of organizations are traditionally segmented from an administrative perspective. Right, traditionally we'll have a telephony or network team and an Active Directory or Microsoft administration team. Right, and sometimes those things are siloed, and they can be done for very good reason. But what you can do with Continuum Connect is allow your telephony team to manage those Teams users as it plays towards Microsoft Teams calling, without actually having to grant them access to the Teams Administrative Center, or grant them administrative roles that maybe don't suit the security requirements, the business requirements of your organization. Okay. So that's one component of it. And then the other is that we're always plugging things in, and we're trying to make sure that when we do that we still remain that unifying glue between the various components that we're bringing in, to ensure that the administrative actions of your organization are really minimized as we bring those things together. All right. And thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your time and you listening. For any questions that were posted or any questions you may have, please present those, and we will respond to those as soon as possible.